can go ahead and start if you want. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our monthly career workshop. My name is Chris Stevens. I am a career coach with a nonprofit organization called Career Catchers here in Montgomery County. And I'm here partnered with the Ignite Hub to facilitate this workshop for you today on transferable skills. We do want this to be an interactive presentation. So if you're here in person, please raise your hand if you have any questions or comments. If you're on Zoom, please use the hand raise function, or you can put your questions in the chat, and we will address them. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Today's topic is going to be around career crossover, how to master your transferable skills. So what are we talking about today? We're going to talk about sort of how to identify your transferable skills. We're going to talk about how you make them relevant to the career that you're intending to pursue, and how to highlight these transferable skills on your resume and cover letter and LinkedIn profiles and things like that. So that's what we'll be covering today. Now, who knows what transferable skills are? When we talk about transferable skills, what are we talking about? Does anyone have any ideas? So a lot of times when you're job searching, right? The thing that all these companies are looking for are skills, right? Core competencies, core skills, key skills. And a lot of times, if you're in the job search, you'll see things like, an entry-level job for, let's say, an IT help desk role, right? Entry-level help desk role, but they want 2 years of experience. And that's a little bit confusing, right? Why, how is this an entry-level job if you need experience to get it? And, if I'm interested, but I don't have any experience in IT, how can I, can I even apply for it? How can I go about applying for that? And that's where transferable skills come in. Transferable skills allow you to sort of bridge the gap between what you're doing now and what you want to be doing in the future. We are with the Ignite Hub today, which does focus on IT programs. I'll be using a lot of IT examples, but these transferable skills are relevant across any career, right? They're the knowledge, skills, and abilities that can be useful across any number of jobs and industries. So that's what we're talking about with transferable skills. Oh, I see we have a number of people joining us here. While we wait for them to come in, here's some examples of some common transferable skills. Now, when we think about transferable skills, a lot of times what we see are soft skills, right? Versus hard skills. Now, hard skills are things that you usually you can learn. You do some sort of training or education program. Maybe you have on-the-job experience to learn a very specific skill. If it's repairing a computer is a hard skill. Drawing blood, if you're in healthcare, doing some sort of medical procedure is a hard skill. Even something like, cooking, right? Using like culinary equipment, if you're in food service or retail, that would be a hard skill, right? It's something you can learn. Now these soft skills though are something where you certainly can learn them and you can certainly improve them, but they're a little bit harder to train, right? Looking at this list here, communication, problem solving, leadership. These are a lot of skills that I would argue all of us already have some sort of, familiarity with. Communication, we do that every day, whether we're talking with someone or listening with someone. Problem solving, every day we are solving any number of problems, both big and small, and we may not even realize we're doing it. Leadership, can you motivate people and encourage people to work toward a goal? You don't necessarily have to be a manager or a supervisor or in a designated leadership position, to be a leader. You can model the right behavior. You can lead by being a good follower. Time management, right? How are we managing our times? Simply by coming on this workshop today and taking an hour out of your day to join us, that's practicing time management, right? You've made space for this workshop. Teamwork, if you've ever had to work in a group, either just in your personal life or in a professional environment, that's teamwork. Do you get along with people and not, get frustrated or upset at them? Things like adaptability. Are you flexible? If things don't go your way, can you change? If something unexpected comes up, how do you react to that? Can you figure out another way forward? Even things like technical proficiency, which you would think might be more on the hard skills side, in this case can refer to basic computer skills, right? Can you navigate email? Everyone who's joining us virtually, has mastered Zoom, and while that's a relatively simple task, companies rely on it, right? That's how a lot of work gets conducted these days is virtually. So, just by being on this Zoom call, you've demonstrated some technical proficiency. And also cultural diversity, right? What do we mean by that? That's more so, can you work with different groups of people, who may have different sets of beliefs or work styles? Can you work with all the, with different types of people? So these are all examples of soft skills. And if you look at any kind of list of transferable skills, these are more than likely going to come up. And I really do want to highlight this because it does show that, you know, a lot of us already have these skills. A lot of times when we're thinking about switching careers, we sort of focus on the hard skills, what we don't have or what we might need to be trained to do. But we oftentimes don't sort of think about everything we're already bringing to the table. And that's, if you don't take anything else out of this presentation, that's what I want you to remember is that all of us have, some of these transferable skills that can be useful in whatever you want to do. All right. Talk about identifying uh, identifying your own transferable skills. What's anyone here or in person? What's an example of some that you might have yourself? Anyone like to share? All right. Well, maybe we can show some examples here. Let's do a skill mapping exercise. So in our example, we're gonna take someone who is a teacher, right? Someone in the teaching profession, and they're trying to transfer over to IT. So let's take a skill that they would have, right? Classroom management, and let's see how that would fit into a new role, right? Team coordination. If you're working in an IT department, you are more than likely, on a team. You're collaborating with other people to troubleshoot and solve these issues. Um, so the transferable aspect there would be, if you can manage and coordinate groups of students, that does translate into coordinating team activities. It doesn't really matter whether they're children or adults. Um, the fundamental skills are still the same, right? Um, you're still doing that same kind of thing. Uh, everyone needs to get along. Everyone needs to be heard. Everyone has to have the option to share their perspective, and that skill doesn't change. What about something like lesson planning, right? Well, if you're working in IT, chances are you are probably going to be involved in doing some sort of training program, right? Maybe teaching others how to use a technology, or even learning a new sort of skill yourself and needing a plan for that. So someone who creates lesson plans, that involves the same skills as developing an IT training program for employees, right? Any kind of new technology, is going to require some sort of training plan. And those skills are just as relevant, right? What do people need to know, and how are you gonna teach it to them, and what are some of the common barriers or like uh, problems that might come up that you can't anticipate. Last one here, student assessment, right? If you're a teacher, you are doing grading, you are, reviewing students' projects or homework. Um, Now, how might that translate to performance evaluation, right? If you're in an IT role, you're going to be doing a lot of evaluation, whether that's of other people's performance or of technology, right? You're trying to evaluate certain technology. Again, assessing, progress and providing feedback. That aligns with evaluating team performance or employee performance, and even offering constructive feedback, right? If you're at a help desk role, you are, helping someone, assessing what someone may be doing wrong and trying to help them. So offering feedback in a constructive way to help them solve that issue. So, these are just three examples, but hopefully it does sort of show you the point that, that pretty much you can take a skill from your current role and match it to something else. We're going to go through a couple more examples here. This time we're going to go from retail to IT. So I'd like to see if anyone on the line has some answers to this. Do we think that a common job in retail, right, handling customer complaints, do we think that is transferable to like problem solving and conflict resolution in an IT role? What do we think? Any thoughts? All right. Oh, I apologize. Give me 1 second here. I'm gonna pause the presentations for just a minute. Let me, for the delay, I realized there was a technical issue on my end. We are going to talk about resume writing, I promise. I understand that was the topic that was advertised. It was simply a little farther along in my presentation. I do apologize for that. That said, talking about the transferable skills and really thinking about sort of what you bring to the table is extremely important, to the resume. If you are, creating a resume, the first thing you do want to know is, what you bring to the table. That is the purpose of a resume. So in that vein, we're going to, continue a little bit here, and kind of switch back and forth a little bit, because we do have some examples here about what we about how to sort of put things on the resume here. So now that we've identified our skills and kind of thought about, hey, what is something that what is my goal here, right? I'm trying to go from job A to job B. How do I really showcase that? How do I showcase these skills, right? And the way you're going to do that is through your resume, right? The resume is a first impression for any employer, or hiring manager or company. That is the first thing they are going to, to see of you, right? Is your experience. A lot of times with overwhelmingly, I would say in our current, job search environment, you have to apply online. The first thing you're going to do is find a company you want to apply to, go on their website, create an account, submit your resume. That is almost always the first step. Even if you can apply in person or sort of do networking, right? Talking with someone in person, they're going to ask, they're going to want a resume. There's only so much you can talk to someone at a networking event. Eventually they're going to want to actually have a good sort of layout of your experience and education and so on. So you use the resume to make a positive first impression, to really show interest in the company by sort of tailoring what you bring to the table with what they're looking for. And ultimately, it's a way to, showcase your skills and experience. Now, a lot of times, when we sort of think about resumes, we think, what's the purpose of a resume? Well, it's to get a job, right? Ultimately, a resume hopefully lands you a job. And yeah, kind of. But really, when you're thinking about a resume, the purpose is to get you an interview. In the modern sort of job process, again, what it usually looks like is you submit an initial application, submit your resume, and then you probably go through one or two interviews, maybe an initial phone interview or a screening interview, and then usually a second interview with a hiring manager or a supervisor or something like that in a company. If that goes well, they ask you to submit references, do a background check, and hopefully comes out with a job offer. But getting to that interview is really the first kind of hurdle that that we need to overcome. And the resume is what gets you there. Normally you don't go from just submitting a resume, to getting hired. Companies want to see who you are. That's where the interview comes in. So, you want to make sure that your resume is tailored and detailed enough to essentially, get the employer's attention so they can offer you an interview. And this is important because when you do interview, what you have on your resume is what they're going to be looking for. So you want to make sure that your information is as accurate as possible, right? So maybe you've identified all of your skills, you've tailored your resume. Obviously writing a resume can take a while. You put a lot of effort into it. That said, how long do we think employers look at our resumes? This is on average, but how long do you think employers or recruiters look at a resume? Thoughts? 15 to 20 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds, 1 to 2 minutes. Okay, 45 seconds. We have a guess. Any other ones? All right. Well, the answer is 15 to 20 seconds on average. Some places may take longer, but a lot of times, especially with sort of AI and ATS technology, which we'll talk about, applicant tracking software, resumes don't really get a lot of attention, a lot of deep attention, right? So I don't say this to sort of discourage you, but really to you have to make yourself stand out really quickly. That's where the transferable skills come in, right? Listing your transferable skills sort of right away gives an employer a good sense of what they're looking at. So you really have to make yourself stand out. Now, there's a few different ways to do a resume. There's no sort of one perfect way of doing it, but this sort of format here, this outline is generally the most accepted way to do it, right? You've got your name, contact information, maybe an objective statement or a summary, and we'll break each of these down. At the top here, I like to follow it up with a summary of skills and qualifications. Again, that's where some of these soft skills, these transferable skills come in, or hard skills, right? If you've got them. Then we have work experience. Usually this is listed in reverse chronological order. So, whatever your most recent job or experience is, that goes first, and then you work your way back. Education and training on here, also very important. And then, if you can add some extra sections if you want. Sometimes people put in things like, memberships in different organizations or, community or volunteer activities. Sometimes they have awards or achievements, and that's fine. You can put those in as a separate section, or you can work them in elsewhere. Whatever you choose to do, it's up to you. Like I said, there's no one way to do it. But bottom line, name, skills, work, education, and training. Those are the core pieces of your resume that you need. Without those, you probably aren't likely to get very far. Now, I would argue that the most important piece of this resume is not the work experience. Whoops, not the work experience, not the education, but the contact information, right? If you don't have a name, or you have or contact information, or maybe you have an incorrect phone number or email, it doesn't matter how good your resume is, you're not going to get, it's not going to get looked at. They can't contact you, they're going to move on to the next person. So, whatever you do, make sure your contact information is correct. And it's worth double checking. People switch phone numbers, they switch emails. You may have a typo in your email or phone number. It happens. But again, it can lead to an employer not being able to contact you. So even though we often kind of overlook it, make sure you always go back and make sure you have the right contact information. Comments or questions at this point? All right. So starting with the objective and summary statement. The point of a summary or an objective, it's a short 1 to 2 sentence summary of your experience or your interest. If you're coming into it, if you're coming into a job with some professional experience, you might do a summary. If not, if you're just starting out, you may have an objective, right? Either way, the purpose is the same. It's to give whoever's looking at the resume, again, a short summary of exactly what you're looking to do. It's meant to grab their attention, right? If you're in healthcare, certified nursing assistant with 5 years of patient experience in hospital environments. If you're in retail or sales, a strong, customer service and sales professional interested in automobiles, computers, whatever it is, right? Help desk specialists, for IT with experience supporting, government clients doing X, Y, and Z. Again, it rather than have a recruiter or hiring manager sort of have to scan through your resume to kind of see what you're looking for and what your experience lines up with, you're telling them right off the bat with the summary. So it's I would always recommend having a summary statement in the resume. Now, if you're doing an objective statement, that's a little bit different. That's mostly saying what you're looking for. And again, usually I would recommend an objective statement if you're not coming in with a lot of experience. If you're a recent grad, your objective statement might be recent computer science grad looking for a position in an entry-level cybersecurity position, something like that. It still tells people sort of what you have and what you're looking for. So again, they're not trying to search your resume for clues about that. One thing you can also sort of do here is, and I guess this would be more sort of in the contact section, but you can include a LinkedIn URL as well if you have one. Or, and this is more for IT or possibly some more creative career fields, but if you have a portfolio or something like that, you can include links to to either your LinkedIn or your portfolio in your resume as well. Again, I would recommend probably putting that up here between the contact information and the objective statement. But again, that's another quick way that that hiring managers can use to kind of look at your work, and it allows you to put in a little more detail than you can normally get in your resume. So pretty straightforward. Any comments or questions on the objective or summary statement? All right. Moving right along. So skills. We've talked about this a little bit already. Here again, the transferable skills are what's really important. So, in addition to all those soft skills, and again, I really recommend, acknowledging what soft skills you have. You can put pretty much anything in here, right? If you have computer skills, great. If you speak another language, that's a skill that can go in here. Sometimes if you have a certification, that can also go in your skills section. It depends. You can either do that under skills or under training. Depends on what you want to highlight, right? But whatever you choose to put in here, try to make it so that whatever skills you have are relevant to the position. We all have, a whole list of skills that that we can talk about, but you only have so much space on a resume. So try to if you find that you're putting too many skills on your resume, try to narrow it down to the position that you're actually applying for. Some skills may be more relevant than others. It's great that you might be a good cook or something, but if you're applying for an IT role, that may not be as relevant, right, as some other sort of customer service related skills. And again, the point of a skills section is to immediately give an employer or a hiring manager a snapshot of what you bring to the table. Rather than them searching through your resume, getting to the end of your education section and seeing that you have an A+ certification, they see it right at the top. They see that you have experience in computer repair and software development, whatever it may be, rather than, again, having them go search for it. Comments, questions? And even if you don't have, it's always good to have sort of skills that you have experience in, but even if it's skills that you've gotten through education or training, you can still put them up here, right? Maybe you haven't had hands-on experience with computer repair, but you've taken a CompTIA A+ class, right? So you can have knowledge of computer repair concepts and things like that. And that's okay to highlight as a skill here. Comments or questions on the skills? Oh. Can you see my slide? Is it good? Okay, great. All right, so that's the skills. Perfect. Next up, the experience section. And this is where a lot of your time will be spent putting this piece together, and where you'll probably spend the most time tailoring it. And it's important, right? Experience is where you show that you can do the job. Now, when we think about experience, most of the time we do think about paid work. And that's true. That's great. If you have any kind of paid work, absolutely put it on under here. But, for those who don't have a lot of paid work, or maybe the paid work you do have, may not be all that relevant for, the job you're trying to go for, that's okay. If you have any kind of volunteer experience or internships, that can also count as experience. I would encourage you to think as broadly as possible. Another thing you can put on here is any kind of projects that you've done. Um, Again, I'm using a lot of IT examples here, but if you've built a website for yourself or done some sort of coding project, it may not have been, for a company or for pay, but it's still something you've done, right? It's still experience that shows that you have those all important skills. So paid work, volunteer opportunities or experiences, internships, projects, all of this can be counted as experience, and all of this should be on here if you can. Now, rule of thumb, I recommend only going back 10 years on your resume. A lot of us, have a lot of experience, and if we were to put all of it on there, the resume would go for pages and pages and pages. What we're looking for is a little shorter, right? No more than 2 pages. So I recommend, going back 10 years. If you don't have 10 years worth of experience, that's fine. Go back as far as you can. A lot of people may not. Um, but try not to go longer than 10 years. The reason for that is, the farther back it is, the less sort of relevant and the more sort of you might need to update some of those skills. Um, Now, if you have experience that is relevant, but maybe it's 10 years, it's past, 10 years ago, you could still potentially put it on there. It is a case by case basis. I would probably make a subsection under experience called something like, additional work or additional experience. But generally speaking, try not to go past 10 years. Now, when we're describing, the important part is, how do we describe our experience? And we want to make this as detailed and as impactful as possible. So it's not just about sort of what you do, but what were the results of your work. If I'm working in a call center, maybe I answer customer questions over the phone. Great, that is certainly a experience. I can put that as a bullet point. Um, that's what I did. But what were the results of that? By helping people over the phone, did I help them save money? Did I sell them a product? What were the outcomes here? So as much as possible, don't think about just what you did, but what were the results? Going back to that teaching example, maybe you taught math to children. Did all those children, pass your class? Did their understanding of math improve, right? If you're in retail, sure, you sold, merchandise to people. Did you meet or exceed your sales goals? Did you sign people up for, store memberships? All of those kind of things are actual sort of results that you have that can serve to highlight your experience, and try to use numbers where possible, right? In this call center role, I, answered, is it better to say that I answered customer calls or answered 60 customer calls and resolved issues every hour, right? Having that number sets me apart a little bit, especially from someone who just has the what they did without really showing the results. The other thing you want to do is use action words where possible. So something like you don't want to say sort of did sales or something like that. You want to say sold X amount of products. You don't want to say necessarily worked with patients if you're in healthcare. You conducted an assessment of their concerns. You provided medication. You really want to make your action words, your statements stand out. We have a couple examples of those later, but the point is you want to use action words. You also want to keep your descriptions short. There are no full sentences in your bullet points. None of them are going to say I did this. It's just going to be action word and what you did, right? I helped patients in a hospital. No, I, assisted patients in the, emergency room in a hospital. Um, I should not be in your resume anywhere. Comments or questions on that? I know it's a lot of information. Don't worry, I'll be getting a copy of the slides. But any comments on this so far? All right. Now this kind of goes back to the point of the resume is to get you an interview, and also the transferable skills, right? The last thing you want to do on your resume is sell yourself short. Um, Again, we all bring so many different skills and experiences to the table, and we really want to convey that on our resume. Really sort of think about what you did and be honest with yourself. You've probably done a lot more than you think. There's a story I like to tell of someone I was working with years ago. She was a teacher. I know more teaching examples, but she was a teacher. She taught, I think, elementary school math, and I was working on a resume with her, and I said, "Okay, you're a math teacher. Tell me what you did." She said, "Okay, well, I taught math to third graders." I said, "Okay, great. We'll put that down. What else? What else do you do?" She said, "Well, that was it. I just, I was a math teacher, so I taught math to third graders." And so that led to a larger conversation, right? That's all she felt like she was doing, but in reality, she was doing so much more than that. She was managing the classroom. She was enforcing discipline. She had to do paperwork and exam grading, lesson planning, curriculum development, interacting with parents. There's so many different tasks that go into just, that go into teaching besides just the actual teaching. And even in teaching, there's ways you can describe that to really sort of highlight your impact. So, really, really think about sort of what you do. And a good way to kind of do this is to imagine that you're someone reading a resume and you have no idea what it is that you currently do, right? How would you describe it to someone else? You want to use that level of detail. A good way to do that is to have a friend or family member read it over, right? Because they're not going to be as familiar with what you do as you are, and they may have suggestions. So really, don't sell yourself short. You really want to get as much of your experience in there, and brag about yourself. That's the whole point of the resume. That said, do not make up experience. A lot of times, it's easy to sort of embellish, or some people outright, make up experience. I've had a few folks who've come in with resumes that have experience on there that they just don't have. When I ask them about it, they say, "Oh, a friend told me to put it on here," or, "Oh, I copied the job description so that I could get through the screening." And that doesn't work. Remember how I said the point of a resume is to get an interview? Yeah. So if you make up experience or you lie about it, um, the interview is where they're going to catch you. If I'm trying to get an IT role and I give myself all sorts of certifications and 5 years of experience that I don't have, the first thing they're going to ask me in the interview is, "Okay, tell me about your experience." And then I'm going to be stuck, right? I'm not going to get past that part in the process. You're much better off, sort of highlighting what you do have, again, focusing on those transferable skills. Um, and, you have a better shot there, because if a recruiter or a company realizes that you are making stuff up, they're not gonna hire you. So you have a much better shot sort of presenting your true self, your authentic self, than making things up. I know there's a lot of talk about, oh, do this and this and this to get through AI and ATS, and we'll talk about that. But you can't do that by making things up, um, or assuming that you'll have time to learn it if you do get called for an interview, right? So, you know, be yourself. I can almost guarantee you that you have enough to sort of brag about without having to make things up. That's a very important point there, and I do want to mention it because it does happen. The other thing you want to do is watch out for jargon. So jargon is a sort of language or words that are very specific to a certain industry, but other people outside of it may not understand it, right? A lot of times when you think about jargon, you think about government or military acronyms that someone who's in that environment may understand, but someone else may not. Healthcare is another one that uses a lot of terminology, medical terminology that I don't know that I would understand just if I was to walk in off the street. And because the person who's reviewing your resume may not be an expert in the field, right? You may be applying for a technical IT role. The recruiter may not have that background, right? They may have an HR background. So you want to make sure you're explaining it you want to make sure your resume is accessible not just to fellow professionals, but also to someone who may not have any idea what your past work has entailed. So just watch out for anything that might be confusing to people. Now there are some exceptions. If I'm applying for a healthcare role and I put that I have CPR, most people know what that means, right? Um, if I say that, in my past experience I worked for the FBI, people generally know what that means. But when in doubt, spell out what it is, or come up with a different phrase to make it a little more accessible. Comments or questions on that? All right. The other thing I want to highlight here, and I'm going to switch back to this other presentation here. When we talk about sort of highlighting the skills on here, we want to make sure that all the skills you identify in your resume are tied to your experience. So, if you have communication, leadership, some kind of technical skill, whatever it is, it's great that you have that in a skills section on your resume. And and a recruiter may see that and say, great, this is what I'm looking for. That gets their attention, which is what you want to do. But then they're actually going to go into your resume. Once they see, great, I'm looking for someone who has customer service experience. I'm now going to review their experience to see exactly what it is, that they've done with customer experience. So whatever skills you list at the top, you do want to make sure that it is tied into your experience somehow. So as you're reviewing the job description, you do want to identify those key skills. You do want to match them to your own, but you also want to make sure that it's reflected not just in the professional summary or the skills section, but also in your experience. So any specific examples you can have are great. Again, focus on those results. Any kind of numbers you can tie in there to provide evidence, great. And again, prioritize the ones that are most relevant. Bottom line, you do want to explicitly connect any of your skills to the job requirements, and really show how your experiences have prepared you for that role. In my time as a coach, I have heard a few different strategies and things like that about, well, if I put all my skills in white and make them a small font and something like that, it'll get me through the AI process. Again, that doesn't really work, because again, the recruiter is going to be looking at sort of what they can see, and you can't really again, you can't really cheat the system like that. Let me get my screen share back. All right. So, comments or questions on sort of experience and really how to highlight that. All right. So again, just a few examples here. What's a better bullet point in your presentation? Is it that you used a cash register, or maybe that you processed customer payments using a point of sale system, right? Probably the second one. What about, did CPR training? How about instead completed CPR training through the American Red Cross, right? Maybe you led an IT support team, or maybe it sounds better that you supervised a team of 5 IT support technicians attaining 100% ticket resolution. Again, you can see with these second examples, they're a lot more detailed, and in some cases it lets you sort of highlight different results and things like that. If another candidate has this on their resume and you have this, you're more likely to, even if you've done relatively the same thing, you're more likely to get the job because you've explained it better. So just some examples about how to really highlight things on your resume there. We talked about action words, so just a few examples here. Managed, performed, calculated, created, oversaw, supervised, communicated, monitored, trained, all things like that. You don't just want to have it be assisted with XYZ, assisted with XYZ, assisted with XYZ, provided XYZ. You want to vary it up a little bit. Try not to repeat the same words at the beginning of your bullet points if you can help it. You could probably do it for one or two, but where possible, try to change it up. It's a little more dynamic that way. All right, comments or questions on education and experience? All right, we will move on then. So the next part after that is education and training. And again, similar to work experience, when we think about education and training, we often think about formal education, college or university or something like that. But education and training is so much more than that, right? It can be certifications. It can be training that sort of done yourself. It could be, sort of on the job, like potentially on the job training or trainings that have been sponsored by an employer. All of that can fit under this section. That said, you do want to show sort of some evidence of schooling where possible. Most, if not all most jobs require, at least a high school diploma, and you want to make sure that that's on your resume, just so recruiters can check that box. If you do have education beyond high school, put your highest degree first. Again, we're sort of going in that reverse chronological order. You want the school name, the program, the date you graduated is optional, I would say. If it's recent, great. If it's, you graduated more than 10 years ago or so, you can probably leave the date off. It's up to you. The other thing you can do with, and this kind of goes back to the transferable skills, let's say you have a degree, maybe in computer science, but not a lot of actual experience in the field. Under your education, under that degree, right, bachelor's degree in computer science, if you want, you could have a short bulleted list of relevant coursework. Don't list out every class you've ever taken for that degree, but list out the relevant ones. If I have a bachelor's degree in computer science and I'm applying to be a cybersecurity specialist, I would list out some of the cybersecurity related coursework that I've done, right? Or maybe described a project or two that I've done in my educational program. So you can add a few little details there as well. If you'd like to put GPA on there, you certainly can. I generally recommend, if it's a 3.5 or above, put it on there. Otherwise, you don't have to do that. And you can also include certifications. So, certainly for IT, there's any number of certifications you could put on there: A+, Network Plus, Security Plus, CCNA. All of that can go on here under your education and training. It doesn't have to just be formal certifications, though. Training is, there's plenty of online resources and self-directed training you can do. And if you go online and take a class through Google or Udemy or Coursera, one of those platforms, you can go ahead and put it on here. That is still training that you've done. It's still knowledge that you have. It's still skills that you can demonstrate. So there's nothing wrong with online training. You can go ahead and put that on your resume as well, if it is relevant. Again, kind of the same thing: school name or program name, the date that you acquired it, and yeah, that's you're more than welcome to put that on here. Comments or questions on education and training? Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Great. Now, this is our last category here, and this is the one I said was optional. But if you have other relevant information, you can include it on here. So sometimes, people have a membership in a professional organization. If I'm applying for a cybersecurity role and I'm a member of the American Society of Cybersecurity Specialists, that might be a relevant thing to put on here, right? It shows that I'm engaged in the field. Maybe I was part of an academic honor society, Phi Beta Kappa, or even in high school, a high school honor society, something like that. You can go ahead and put that on here, either under a separate sort of like membership section, or if it's school related, you could include that under your education and training as well. I would just include it as a bullet point, right? bachelor's degree in computer science, honor roll, valedictorian, whatever, whatever it is, you can stick that under here. If you're part of a, another community organization and you feel like it's relevant, sure, go ahead and put that on here too. Now, volunteer activities we sort of talked about under experience, and you can certainly combine it with your sort of work experience section if you want. But if you do want to separate the two, it's fine to have a a work experience or professional experience and then a volunteer experience section as well. Again, with the volunteering, I would make sure that it's relevant to the role that you're applying for. Or if you're using it to fill a gap where maybe you're not working, that's fine. I would absolutely include that on here. And that's also why, it's important, I mentioned the online training and things like that. If you haven't been, been working, maybe you're applying for jobs, but nothing's really come through yet. It's important that employers, see that you're doing something, right? You're not just sitting around. You're trying to learn a new skill. So online training can taking online training and volunteering can show that you're doing something. Even if it's not necessarily related to the field that you're trying to go into, you can still show that you're doing something. So, having a volunteer entry that, shows the dates that you're job hunting, or the dates, that you're completing online training while you're job hunting, that serves an important role because recruiters can see that and like that. If you're not working currently, I absolutely recommend volunteering or trying to find some sort of skill building program to complete in the meantime. Another thing you can put on here is awards. Now, awards again can go under work experience or education experience if they're related. But if you wanted a separate section too, that's fine. The key point with awards is make sure you describe the award, right? I could, if I'm working at Target and I get the Star Employee Award or Employee of the Month Award, that's great. It's an achievement. But what does that actually mean? What did I actually do to get that award, right? It's going to be a little more impactful if it's, received the Star Award for exceeding sales goals or for getting, the highest, customer service feedback, things like that. You want to make sure you describe the award so people know exactly why you're being recognized versus just saying that you got an award, right? Projects are another thing you can put on here. Again, this is more so for probably more so for technical careers. Again, using some IT examples, if you have designed a website on your own or written code or done anything like that, you can showcase sort of what went into the project. And again, I would be as detailed as possible. What tools do you use? What platforms did you use? What was the outcome of your project? Was the website fully functioning? Do people actually go on it and get useful information? Things like that. You can include that on here in addition to the volunteer experience and any paid experience that you have. If you're if you have like freelance work or maybe in like a creative field and you do some sort of project in that capacity, you could also potentially put it on here. If you're, let's say you're applying to let's just say a journalism role, right? You're trying to be a journalist for a local paper. If you have your own personal blog on the side, right? Your own sort of online newsletter, that could be a potential project that you would describe here. It might not fit under your work experience, it might be something you're just doing on your own, but it's still relevant to what you're trying to do, right? Which is journalism. So you can include that on the project section. Last thing here, this is a little more rare, but publications. If you have any sorts of publications, you've written any papers, articles, things like that, those are good to include on the resume if you've got them and if they're relevant to the role that you're applying for. Just make sure that they're correctly cited. And I would generally have those as a separate section that you can include if you have the space. If you did have to write articles or papers for a work experience, you could describe that under work experience that you published articles in X, Y, and Z magazine. but actually having the titles and things like that, the actual citations, I would make that a separate section. So this is just if you have it, but you can certainly put publications on here as well. Comments or questions on some of the other relevant information that you might want to include here on a resume? Does that all make sense? Okay. And again, it's really your choice about if you want a separate section or if you want to sort of integrate it into, the work experience or education. Either way is fine. So I mentioned before, one of the biggest challenges that people have with writing resumes are gaps. And, life happens, right? Maybe we were laid off. Maybe we had to leave a job for some reason. There's any number of reasons why you might have a gap in your resume. But where possible, you do want to fill those gaps. Again, employers like to see that you've been doing something, even if it isn't directly related to your intended career path. So again, I'm going to emphasize that volunteering is a great way to do that. In addition to, doing something, you are, learning new skills, you're meeting people, you're potentially networking. So, you can have a very sort of impactful volunteer experience and lay that out on your resume. That's fine. A lot of times people, may take time off work to take care of family members, right? Either young children or elderly family members. And, that's okay, right? That's what we have to do sometimes. Even something like that you can include on your resume if you want. I've worked with folks who, have taken some time out of the workforce to, take care of family members, and you can put that as experience. You can sort of give yourself a title, right? Child care provider, and list out everything that you did in the process of taking care of people, right? Because that's a full-time job in and of itself. You took them to appointments, you helped with schoolwork, you managed a household budget, you did meal prep. So, there's all kinds of things that go into that, that can kind of, fill that gap there. And again, school and training. If you're not working, you should ideally be trying to, to learn some new skills while you're job hunting. And, not everyone can go back to school or take a lot of, potentially expensive classes, but there's plenty of free online resources that you have access to. And so, focusing in on that and listing out some of those trainings that you take that are relevant to your career field, that is also a great way to fill in the gap here. I think this is probably the biggest challenge that most people come to me with when they're, when putting together a resume. The good news is it's easy, relatively easy to do something about. You just want to be making sure that you're doing something. Comments, questions? All right. So just to review, some general guidelines here for the resume. You do want it to be, professional appearance. This is a very basic outline, but honestly, it should look more or less like this if you were to stick this sort of template into a Word document. You're not going to have a lot of, different colors, of the text. You're not going to have, any pictures or anything like that. That's, it's distracting, right? It's not necessarily a professional appearance. You're not going to include a headshot, for instance. And I have had people that have done that. They've submitted me a resume with a headshot. Unless you're going for a very specific kind of field, usually more of a creative industry, you're not going to have a lot of those extra decorations and visuals and things like that. So, keep it professional, keep it readable, right? That's the real key here, is making sure that it's readable. You do want it to be 100% error free. We talked before that recruiters are spending 15 to 20 seconds looking at your resume. They probably have hundreds of resumes, and they're kind of looking for any reason to eliminate someone, right? To narrow down that list. So having spelling errors and grammar errors and formatting issues, is a very easy way for your resume to get eliminated. And with things like spell check and tools like Grammarly and things like that, there really isn't a reason that you should have spelling errors and things like that. Fortunately, that's a pretty easy one to correct. Now, those programs aren't perfect. Spell check can still miss things. So I do recommend having a second set of eyes look it over, right? They may catch something that you haven't. Um, my sort of philosophy on resumes is no more than 2 pages in length. A lot of times you may just have 1 page. That's fine. But for people who have a lot of experience, no more than 2 pages. Unless you're applying for an academic role, maybe, or sometimes a government role, you're not going to have a resume that's over 2 pages. Again, the recruiters just don't have time to read all that, and the more pages you have, the less likely it is that the information on those other pages is just not going to get seen, right? So no more than 2 pages in length. Keeps it simple. I mentioned before you want to avoid any kind of pronouns. I, me, my shouldn't be showing up. You're not leading my team. You're leading a team or the team, right? I assisted someone with XYZ. It's assisted someone with XYZ. So no pronouns in here. Watch your past and present tense as well. This kind of goes to the grammar point, but if you're currently working in a position or volunteering, make sure it's present tense, right? What you're currently doing now. If it's past experience, make sure it is past tense. So I am currently assisting patients in a hospital. In the past, when I worked at a different hospital, I assisted patients in the emergency room at a hospital. And again, if you're updating your resume after a while, it's easy to miss, right? The tense can be an easy thing to overlook. Fortunately, it is easy to fix. Just whatever you did in the past should be past tense. Try not to repeat yourself. We talked about varying up, using action words and kind of varying up how each bullet point starts. And then yeah, you don't want it to just say assisted with, assisted with, assisted with, and so on. But also, especially for someone who has had a few different positions that are kind of the same, there's a tendency to repeat some of the words in between the jobs. So maybe I worked in retail at Target, and before that I worked in retail at Walmart, right? Those are two pretty similar jobs. I would have done similar types of job duties in both ones, but you don't just want to make it. You don't want the same job description for each one. You want to try to change it up a little bit. Even if you're saying the same thing, you want to make it sound different, right? You don't want to make it look like you just sort of copy and pasted the same experience on here. You want to make it look like you put some thought into it, which you're doing. So try not to repeat yourself and have too many bullet points that say the same thing. Keep one style throughout, so font, letter size, all that kind of thing. Make sure things that are bolded, underlined, just make sure that's all consistent. It doesn't really matter sort of how you choose to do it, but as long as it's the same, that's what's important. A common mistake I get sometimes is if someone is copy and pasted from another document into their resume, the font is different, right? And that kind of sticks out, right? That's pretty obvious when that happens. So, just something to be careful about. Make sure that your style is consistent. Used to be that you would include references on your resume. And I still get that sometimes. People have, references, like a list of references that they tack on the end, or even just a line that says references available upon request. You don't need to do that. I absolutely recommend having a reference list, but that is a separate document that you can hold on to until, you're asked to provide them. It sort of goes without saying that, references are available, right? They're going to ask them, you're going to get asked for references at some point. So you don't need to include that on your resume. It may save you a bit of space. The other thing is, it's a privacy issue as well. If you have contact information for your references and things like that, and you're, putting your resume out everywhere, that is sharing these other people's information, right? So, you don't have to include the references. The other thing is, don't include any personal information. The only information you're giving them is essentially what is relevant to the job, right? Your work experience, your skills, your education. I have had some people say something along the lines of, in their skills section, they list their hobbies, right? They enjoy hiking or snowboarding or dancing or whatever. And that's great. But if it's not relevant to the role, you don't need to include it on there. Again, with the skills, focus on what's relevant. The other thing is, we mentioned gaps, and that's a challenge for some people. And sometimes, I've seen folks that try to explain the gaps, right? I wasn't working during this period because I was taking care of my, elderly father. But that's again, that's providing a little more information than the company needs. It's none of their business, why you weren't working, right? Whether that was taking care of someone or maybe you were sick or whatever. That's not information that they need. Again, if you want to sort of cover it, you can, we can talk about, what I mentioned earlier with, giving yourself like a caregiver role or something. But don't give any sort of specific information about you or your family or your, any sort of like medical conditions, personal issues, anything like that. Another thing I've seen people do sometimes is explain why they've left a job. Maybe they were laid off or fired. And again, that's not really any of the company's business. Sure, they may ask, in an online application, they may ask a reason for leaving. But that's not really something you need to include on a resume. As far as the resume is concerned, you did this job between this date and this date, and now you're looking for a new one. That's all they need. So don't put any personal information on here. Another one is like things like if you have like children or I've seen marital status sometimes put on a resume. None of that is anyone's business except yours. So um, just don't include any personal information. Does this make sense to everyone? Great. All right. So we talked about tailoring it a little bit, and that kind of went with the transferable skills, but really make sure your resume reflects the requirements in the job description. And yes, this does involve some work, right? You're not gonna necessarily just make one resume and use that to apply to every job. You're much more likely to get results if you tailor your resume to the job description. Now, if you're applying to a lot of similar positions, you may not need to do a lot of changes in between each application, but you're probably going to have some, right? Every job is going to have a slightly different description. They're going to be asking for a slightly different set of skills, and you want to make sure that they reflect those. Again, the easiest way to do that is just to go through the job descriptions and identify those keywords, identify those skills, and tie them back to what you've done. I get a lot of questions about sort of AI, and that certainly is the trend now. But sort of what we would call AI in some cases has been a part of the hiring process for many years, even before all sort of the recent interest in it, right? A lot of companies, especially the big ones that get a lot of applications and a lot of resumes, it's too much for any sort of one recruiter or recruiting team to go through, right? They just don't have the time. So they use a shortcut, which is an applicant tracking system, right? ATS software. And what that does is it goes through and basically scans for keywords or, specific descriptions or whatever else, they program it to. And that oftentimes provides sort of the first screen for a company. And really your best way of getting through that applicant tracking system is to include these keywords and really tailor your resume. You should not just be copying the job description into your resume. Again, that's pretty transparent. When a human looks at it, they're going to see that. And you also don't want to try any tricks like, again, making it in very small font or making it in white lettering or something like that. Again, that'll get caught in the in the software system. So your best bet is just to to identify your transferable skills and your relevant experience and be as specific about that as possible. Now, the software platforms are all a bit different, but there are some tools you can use to kind of simulate ATS software. There's a website called JobScan where you can actually plug in your resume, and I think you plug in a job description as well, and it actually analyzes it like an ATS system would and say, hey, here are your gaps, here's what looks good, and gives you recommendations about how to improve it. I believe there's a paid version, but also a free version. So I recommend using these tools as well as you're getting ready to submit an application, because they really can help you with tailoring your resume. Comments, questions? All right. Another tip is, because we're talking about sort of tailoring resumes, you're going to have a bunch of different resumes. I always recommend creating a master resume. This is going to be something that has all of your skills, all of your education, all of your experience. This is not a resume that you will submit to anyone. This is simply a resume for your own personal use. It is a place to record all of your experience, to list everything that you've done, And you can use that as a basis to tailor it for specific job roles. It's often helpful to sort of, even if you're working right now, to just to sort of continuously update a master resume with things that you've done, so that you don't have to think back later and when you may have forgotten something. So this is always a good tip, and if you have a master resume, you can always cut it down into a resume that you're going to send to an employer. All right, I think that about wraps up our time, but if there's any final comments or questions, now is the time. We do have a survey on the screen here, so if you can take a minute to scan the code. We do appreciate the feedback and use it to improve our offerings in the future. So please take a minute to fill that out. And if anyone has any questions, please, now is the time. Give everyone a minute to look at the code, and we have a link in the chat for it as well. And while we're wrapping up, I'm going to share one more thing here. So as I mentioned at the beginning, my name is Chris. I'm a career coach. I work for an organization called Career Catchers, and we are partnered with the Ignite Hub at Montgomery College. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Now, the Ignite Hub is a program at Montgomery College that's focused on IT, right? Whether you're someone who's interested in getting into the IT field, or maybe you already work in the IT field and are trying to look for the next move in your career. There are a lot of great resources here that you can take advantage of. Ignite Hub hosts these monthly career workshops. And actually, let me get to the GitHub. Let me get to the home page here. Where? Should be. Oh, there it is. You can find a list of all kinds of great, offerings and workshops. This fall, they have a number of guest speakers coming in. Here we go. Yep, under the fall events here, there's a number of guest speakers coming in. The next event for their Fireside Chat series is on November 3rd. Talking about careers in tech. There's some Lunch and Learn series. There's, of course, our monthly career workshops. And there's also a wonderful IT career pathways workshop series that if you're not sure if you want to get into IT but aren't sure which direction to take, I highly recommend this one. It's a fantastic wealth of information. The other one that I want to point out is there's going to be an upcoming workshop at the end of this month around navigating the DMV tech market. So if you're in this area, and I'm assuming you are, and have some questions about this area specifically, what it takes to find a job, I recommend checking this out. So a lot of great workshops here, a lot of great programs. And another service that we offer is if you're a county resident and interested in IT, I am also here to provide one-on-one career coaching. So let's say you're putting together a resume. I can help with that, right? I can meet with you one-on-one to update your resume, to identify job opportunities, to help you prepare for interviews. We can do career planning, all that kind of support that goes into finding a job. So if you are interested, you can make an appointment under the career coaching tab on the website and make an appointment here. Now it can fill up pretty quickly sometimes. So if you want to reach out to me directly, I will go ahead and put my email in the chat here. You will be getting a copy of this presentation along with the information to sign up for the coaching sessions as well, so not to worry. Any questions about the Ignite Hub and what they offer?
Chris, can you go back to the homepage?
The which one? Homepage? Yeah. I'm muted. Oh, hold on. Can you hear me?
There we go.
Oh, okay, great.
Just wanted to actually let me.
Okay. Oh,
Hey everyone, sorry about that. The echo was coming out of my system at the other end of the room. I just wanted to speak a little bit about the other two events at the bottom of the screen here. The Navigating the DMV Tech Job Market Workshop Series. We'll be running that October 29th through November 19th. This is a good opportunity to learn how to navigate the DMV tech job market, as it says in the title. And Jonathan Corrales is a career coach, many years of experience. If you attend all 4 sessions, you'll be entered for a chance to win a one-on-one coaching session with him for free. And then the other event here, the Empower Tech DMV presents Tech Map Info Session. If you're interested in bolstering your resume with education and experience and certifications with the Tech Map program, or learning about other IT training opportunities here at the college, I recommend you attend this session. It'll be next Wednesday on October 22nd. Now, thank you all for your time.
Yep. But there's no further questions. Thank you all once again for taking time out of your days to join us. And our next workshop will be on November 11th, where we'll be talking about career exploration. So we hope to see you there. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.